The cost of justice. Maya Carter had always been proud of the work she did for the FBI. A respected agent, she had built her career on years of dedication, pushing boundaries to uncover hidden truths. But today, Maya found herself in an entirely different role: protector. It was a sunny Saturday afternoon when she brought her 10-year-old nephew, Elijah, to the local park. Elijah had been living with her for the past few months, trying to adjust to the world around him after a tumultuous year. Maya had always been there for him, both as a family member and a steadfast presence in his life. Elijah, despite his young age, had a bright spirit, his laughter filling the air as he ran across the playground. But the peaceful moment was shattered when a squad car rolled up to the park and Officer Ryan Daniels stepped out. Maya had known the type. Officer Daniels had a reputation in the community, a reputation built on prejudice, quick judgment, and an unwavering bias toward those who didn't look like him. Maya, as a mother, an agent, and a person of principle, had seen this type before. But it was different when it was her own family he was questioning. As she sat on the bench, watching Elijah climb the jungle gym, Daniels approached her with a cold stare. "Ma'am, we've had reports of some suspicious activity. I need to ask you a few questions." Maya didn't miss a beat. "Suspicious activity? This is a public park, officer. What exactly are you implying?" The officer's hand rested on his belt where his weapon lay. His eyes didn't meet hers, but instead flickered to Elijah, still unaware of the tension building. The message was clear. He didn't believe she belonged here. He didn't believe Elijah did either. Maya's jaw clenched. She had been confronted by racism in her line of work before, but this was different. This wasn't a criminal she was chasing. This was an act of power, of control. Daniels wasn't looking for the truth. He was looking to assert dominance. She didn't flinch, though. Years of training and experience had taught her how to stay calm in the face of adversity. But what Maya had come to understand through her journey was that this was not just about one person's prejudice. It was a system that protected the abusers and punished the innocent. In that moment, she realized her responsibility was no longer only to enforce the law. It was to fight for justice, for every child like Elijah who didn't have the voice to stand up. Her heart pounded, but her voice remained steady as she calmly said, "You can't intimidate me, officer, but I will ensure that what you're doing here today is questioned. I will not stand by and watch you abuse your power." Deep insight and reflection. This encounter wasn't just an isolated incident. It was a reflection of the broken system that often went unnoticed by those in power. For Maya, it wasn't just about confronting Daniels. It was about confronting a much larger issue that had been normalized in many communities. The structural barriers, the mistrust, and the bias that people of color faced every day, often at the hands of those who were meant to protect them. Maya realized that true justice wasn't just about righting wrongs in the moment. It was about changing the system and ensuring that future generations like Elijah could walk through the world without fear of being judged by their skin color or their socioeconomic status. Have you ever witnessed an injustice or abuse of power in your community? How did you respond to it? What do you think needs to happen for real change to occur in our institutions to address racial injustice? Unjust confrontation. The day started like any other weekend for Maya Carter, but as the sun reached its peak, her calm afternoon at the park quickly turned into an unwarranted confrontation. As Maya sat on the bench, watching her nephew, Elijah, happily play on the jungle gym, she felt the tension shift. She noticed a police car pull up to the curb, the sudden presence of authority cutting through the easy rhythms of the day. Officer Ryan Daniels, a man she had heard about in passing but never met face to face, stepped out with his hand resting too casually on his holstered weapon. Maya's senses went on alert as he walked toward her with a confident but hostile stride. "Excuse me, ma'am," he began, his voice carrying an edge, "I need to ask you a few questions. We've received reports about some suspicious activity around here." Maya raised an eyebrow, her patience beginning to wear thin. The park was calm, children laughing, families relaxing, and she had done nothing out of the ordinary. Yet Daniel's accusatory tone didn't make sense. "What suspicious activity, officer?" Maya asked, her calm exterior betraying none of the unease stirring inside her. Daniels eyed her for a moment, then shifted his gaze to Elijah, still oblivious to the tension surrounding him. His eyes flicked back to Maya with an air of disbelief, his jaw tightening. "You don't belong here," he said flatly, his words sharp with the weight of unspoken assumptions. "And neither does he." Maya's heart skipped a beat, but she kept her composure. She had dealt with discrimination in her career before, but this was different. This was a direct challenge to her right to be in a place she belonged. "What are you talking about?" Maya's voice remained even. "Elijah is my nephew. I'm his legal guardian. We live here." But Daniels wasn't listening. His brow furrowed, skepticism written across his face. He took another step toward her, his presence looming, as if daring her to challenge him further. "I need to see some ID. Now." Maya stood up, keeping her posture neutral, but inside, a storm was brewing. She knew this game. She knew that Daniels wasn't looking for proof. He was looking to assert his power over her. His words weren't about ensuring safety or enforcing the law. They were about asserting his perception of who belonged and who didn't. "This is ridiculous," Maya replied, feeling her resolve harden. "You're accusing me of something I haven't done, simply because of how I look and who I'm with. And that's not how justice works." Daniel's expression hardened even further, and for a split second, Maya saw the raw reflection of a man trapped by his own prejudices, unwilling to acknowledge the harm he was causing. At that moment, Elijah, still climbing on the jungle gym, called out to Maya, "Aunt Maya, can we go to the ice cream truck after this?" The sweetness of his innocence hit Maya like a punch to the gut. Elijah's safety, his future, was all tied up in this moment. She had to make sure he grew up in a world where this kind of treatment didn't have a place. She took a breath and locked eyes with Officer Daniels, every ounce of her being telling her to stand firm. "You want to see my ID?" Maya said, her voice low but powerful. "I'll show you my ID. But more than that, I'll make sure everyone hears about what just happened here. You're not going to get away with this." This encounter was not just an isolated clash between an officer and a civilian. It was a manifestation of something much deeper, an ingrained belief that certain people, based on their race or appearance, didn't have the same rights or privileges as others. Maya, as a woman of authority in her own right, knew that her voice could challenge this injustice. But it also struck her. How many others, without the same power, would simply accept this kind of treatment? For Maya, this wasn't just about clearing her name. It was about ensuring that Elijah and every child like him could one day walk into any space without the fear of being questioned or targeted. She knew the importance of teaching Elijah resilience, of showing him that his worth wasn't defined by someone's prejudice. Have you ever been unfairly judged based on where you were or who you were with? How did you handle it? What can we do as individuals and communities to ensure that everyone, regardless of their background, feels they belong and are treated with respect? This expanded event further emphasizes the deep racial tension and unjust treatment Maya faces, while showing her strength and determination to protect her family. It also draws out themes of systemic racism and the importance of standing up against unjust power dynamics. The tension in the air thickened as Officer Daniels' hostility grew palpable. Maya's calm, measured words were met with increasingly aggressive gestures. His body language had shifted, no longer just questioning but asserting. The space between them shrank as Maya stood her ground, eyes locked on the officer. She tried once again to defuse the situation, speaking slowly, deliberately. "Officer, please. I'm not here to cause any trouble. I'm just trying to spend time with my nephew. All you need to do is check the records. My identification will clear everything up." But Daniels didn't seem to hear her anymore. His face reddened with frustration, his fists clenched at his sides. His mind, clouded by his bias, could no longer see the situation for what it truly was: a misunderstanding, a person standing up for her family. Instead, he saw Maya as an obstacle to his perceived authority, someone who needed to be put in their place. Without warning, Daniels moved forward with a swift, aggressive motion. His hands shot out and grabbed Maya by the arm, jerking her toward him with enough force to knock the air from her lungs. Time seemed to slow as Maya crashed to the pavement, the impact sending a jolt of pain through her body. For a moment, she couldn't breathe, couldn't move. The world around her spun, and all she could hear was the frantic pounding of her own heart. "Maya!" Elijah's terrified cry pierced through the chaos. His small hands gripped the jungle gym as he rushed toward her, his innocent face twisted in fear. "Aunt Maya, help! What's happening? Why are they hurting you?" But the officer was relentless. He moved quickly to restrain Maya, his knee pressing into her back, hands searching for her wrists. He attempted to cuff her, his voice harsh and commanding. "You're under arrest," Daniels sneered, "for resisting arrest and obstruction." Maya's body tensed in pain, but her mind remained clear. She tried to speak, but the breath was knocked out of her, leaving her with only a whisper. "I haven't done anything wrong." The crowd had gathered, silent witnesses to the unfolding injustice. People stood by, phones in hand, some filming, others too paralyzed by fear to intervene. But not a single person stepped forward to stop Daniels. The park, usually filled with the sounds of joy and laughter, was now eerily quiet, save for Elijah's cries and Maya's labored breathing. "You're hurting her! Stop!" Elijah screamed, his voice cracking with panic, but no one moved. No one came to Maya's aid. The situation spiraled from a moment of confrontation to one of outright violence. What began as an accusation based on racial prejudice quickly escalated into an assault. Maya was not just fighting for her own safety, but for Elijah's future, for the right of every person, especially every person of color, to live without fear of being targeted, dehumanized, or brutalized by those in positions of power. What was even more devastating was the lack of intervention from the bystanders. The video footage that would inevitably surface only showed the officer's brutality. It didn't show the people who watched and did nothing. Maya, despite her strength, realized in that moment that the world wasn't always on her side, even if she was in the right. That was a harsh truth to swallow, but one she would carry with her as she pushed forward, ready to fight for what was right, for her family, and for every person who had ever felt voiceless. In a situation like this, where fear and injustice collide, what do you think the role of witnesses should be? Is it enough to watch, or should we take a stand? How can we change the culture of bystanders who remain silent in the face of injustice? The escalation of the situation highlights the gravity of racial bias and abuse of power, while also emphasizing the emotional impact on witnesses and loved ones. It challenges the audience to consider their own responses to injustice and the importance of solidarity in these moments. Maya's breath was shallow, her body aching under the pressure of Daniel's knee, but her mind remained sharp. As Daniels fumbled with his handcuffs, preparing to bind her wrists, something inside her snapped. She could feel the weight of the moment, the weight of the injustice, the pain, but also the responsibility she carried to stand tall, not just for herself, but for Elijah and everyone who would witness this. With all the strength she could muster, Maya forced her arm from beneath Daniel's grip. The officer's eyes flickered toward her, his anger still evident, but he paused for just a moment, just long enough for Maya to reach into her jacket pocket. In one swift motion, she pulled out her FBI badge, the gold gleaming in the sunlight as she held it high. "That's enough," Maya said, her voice unwavering despite the adrenaline surging through her veins. "You've just assaulted a federal agent. I am Special Agent Maya Carter of the FBI." For a heartbeat, the world seemed to stop. Daniels froze, his hands still gripping the cuffs, but his eyes widened in shock and disbelief. He looked down at the badge as if it were an unfamiliar object, like it couldn't possibly belong to the person beneath him. The crowd, which had been silent and passive until now, collectively inhaled, as if the truth had just been dropped like a heavy weight onto the ground. The officer's confidence, once unshakable, faltered. He looked around, his eyes darting nervously to the onlookers who were now pulling out their phones, recording every second of the scene. He had just made the gravest mistake of his career. Not only had he assaulted a law enforcement officer, but he had done so in front of a growing crowd, and it was all being captured. Wait, you're FBI?" Daniels stammered, his voice breaking as he backed off slightly, trying to regain his composure. I didn't know. I thought you were just... You thought I was just what, officer?" Maya's voice was low and controlled, cutting through his nervous babbling. "Just another person you could push around? Just another victim of your unchecked power?" The crowd began to murmur, their voices growing louder as the reality of the situation set in. The bystanders who had once been passive now began to turn. Some raised their phones higher, recording every interaction. Others exchanged looks of shock, shaking their heads in disbelief at what had just unfolded. Whispers spread like wildfire through the crowd. "She's FBI? He attacked her?" The momentum shifted, and Daniels, once the embodiment of authority, now stood at the center of a storm he had never expected. In that pivotal moment, the entire dynamic changed. Maya's revelation wasn't just a game-changer for Officer Daniels. It was a truth bomb for everyone who had been complicit in turning a blind eye to the abuse of power in their community. What Daniels had failed to see was that Maya was more than just a woman trying to protect her family. She was a symbol of the very institution that had been built to uphold justice. Her badge wasn't just a piece of metal. It represented accountability, transparency, and the rule of law. The officer, for all his training, had failed to see her as an equal. Instead, he had seen her through the lens of his own biases, his assumptions about her place in the world. But Maya's revelation shattered those assumptions, and in the process, the crowd was forced to confront their own complicity in letting these injustices slide by unnoticed. Maya knew this moment would change everything. This wasn't just about clearing her name. It was about showing the community that even those in power could be held accountable. It was a reminder that even the most entrenched systems of abuse could be broken, piece by piece, when those who had been silenced finally found their voice. How do you think the power dynamics change when an individual is revealed to be in a position of authority? Does it affect how people view or respond to them? What does it mean to stand up for justice when those around you may be complicit in letting injustice continue? This turning point underscores the importance of identity and authority in moments of conflict, while also emphasizing the role of bystanders in challenging the status quo. Maya's revelation shifts the entire narrative, exposing both the officer's mistake and the collective power of the community when they decide to take action. Maya stood tall, her posture unyielding as she held Daniel's gaze. Despite the pain, despite the rage simmering inside her, she wasn't going to back down now. The weight of the badge in her hand felt heavier than ever, but she knew it was a weapon of truth, one she had never hesitated to wield in her career. "You have no idea who you're dealing with, officer," Maya said, her voice steady but filled with authority. "You've made a grave mistake, and I won't let it slide." For a moment, Daniel seemed to shrink under her words. The power he had once felt from his uniform, from his perceived authority, now seemed fragile. His chest heaved as he tried to regain control of the situation, but it was already spiraling beyond his reach. Within moments, the first video hit social media. Someone in the crowd had already uploaded the footage, and it spread like wildfire, capturing every second of Daniel's aggressive behavior, the assault on Maya, and the terrifying moment when she revealed herself as an FBI agent. The raw footage didn't need context. It spoke for itself. People everywhere watched as an officer sworn to protect and serve used his power to harm an innocent woman and her child. The video didn't just show a brutal arrest. It showed the ugliness of unchecked racism and authority gone rogue. It didn't take long for Daniel's life to begin unraveling. The footage quickly went viral, and what had started as a quiet afternoon at the park was now national news. Comments flooded in from across the country, people condemning the officer's actions, expressing outrage at the brutality on display. The hashtag Justice for Maya started trending, with people across the nation standing up in solidarity. But the most profound consequence was the ripple effect it had within Daniel's own department. Fellow officers who had once turned a blind eye to his behavior now found themselves forced to confront the truth. Whispers spread in the precinct. What had been accepted as routine by some was suddenly impossible to ignore. Soon after, Daniels began to receive phone calls from higher-ups in his department, from colleagues he had once considered allies. The tone had shifted from friendly to distant, then accusatory. "Ryan," one of his fellow officers said on the phone, "we've seen the footage. We can't protect you this time. You need to take responsibility for what happened." Others distanced themselves, offering only cold statements of regret or indifference. The cracks in his world widened, and Daniels felt himself standing alone in the fallout of his own making. It wasn't just the police department that turned on him. Public figures, colleagues, and even his own family began to express disapproval. The shield of authority he had relied on for so long had disintegrated, and in its place was nothing but a sinking sense of shame. Maya didn't have to lift a finger to ensure Daniels faced consequences for his actions. His own recklessness, his own arrogance, and his own prejudice had already begun to dismantle the life he had once taken for granted. Karma, in this instance, was not some abstract force. It was the undeniable truth, laid bare for all to see. For Maya, the experience was bittersweet. Watching Daniels crumble under the weight of his own wrongdoings brought her a sense of justice, but it also reminded her of the harsh reality. Not everyone would be held accountable as quickly as him. The systems of power were vast and complex, and while some would face swift consequences, others would continue to operate with impunity. But in that moment, she knew one thing for sure. This time, karma had struck back. Maya's resolve didn't waver after the footage went viral. She knew that the fight for justice didn't end with a public outcry or a viral video. The true test would be ensuring that Officer Ryan Daniels faced the full consequences of his actions, not just for what happened at the park, but for the deeper issues within the department that allowed this behavior to fester unchecked for years. She immediately launched an official investigation into Daniels's history, making sure that it wasn't just the assault on her that was scrutinized, but his entire record. Maya understood the significance of this moment. This was not just about one rogue officer. It was about dismantling a culture of impunity that had allowed officers like Daniels to operate with minimal oversight, emboldened by the lack of consequences. The investigation quickly uncovered disturbing patterns. Daniels had a history of complaints against him, multiple accusations of excessive force, racial profiling, and unethical conduct. It wasn't just one or two incidents, there were many, spanning over a decade. But what was most shocking wasn't the nature of the allegations, it was the fact that they had been systematically buried. Internal investigations had been delayed, evidence was ignored, and in some cases the victims were silenced or discredited. The department, it seemed, had been covering up Daniel's misconduct for years, allowing him to continue his career without consequence. The system that was meant to protect the public had instead protected the officers who exploited their power, hiding their actions from the very community they were sworn to serve. As the investigation moved forward, the pressure mounted on Daniels. The weight of his past transgressions and the public exposure of his actions began to break him. No longer the confident officer who had once asserted control over every situation, Daniels was now isolated, facing the full fury of a public that had witnessed his brutality firsthand. Under intense pressure, Daniels cracked. In a series of interviews and depositions, Daniels began to unravel, naming names, confessing to his own role in perpetuating a toxic culture of corruption within the force. He exposed the internal networks that had protected him, revealing a web of officers, supervisors, and even higher-ups who had facilitated his misconduct. He named fellow officers who had participated in the abuse of power, shielding each other from scrutiny, and lying to cover up incidents of racial profiling and excessive force. His confessions rocked the department to its core. The web of corruption he revealed was far more extensive than anyone had imagined, implicating individuals at every level of the police force. It wasn't just Daniels who had been allowed to operate with impunity. It was a systemic issue, one that went far beyond any single officer. The very structure of the department was complicit in perpetuating racial injustice and abuse of power. As Daniels began to name his co-conspirators, the faces of his fellow officers turned from cold indifference to fear. They were no longer untouchable. The walls of protection that had once kept them safe from accountability began to crumble. Those who had been complicit in covering up the truth now found themselves facing their own investigations, their careers, and their futures at risk. The reckoning that followed Daniels' breakdown was swift and unforgiving. It wasn't just Daniels who had to face the consequences. It was a system of corruption that was finally being exposed. Maya's unwavering pursuit of justice, her refusal to let the abuse go unnoticed, set in motion a chain of events that not only brought accountability for one officer, but also sparked a deeper investigation into the very institutions that allowed such misconduct to continue. The exposure of corruption within the police force served as a painful reminder of how deeply embedded systemic injustice can be, but it also highlighted the power of truth. By standing firm, Maya had not only fought for her own justice, but she had become a catalyst for change, pushing the entire system to confront its own flaws. For Maya, this wasn't just about retribution. It was about creating a lasting impact, ensuring that future generations would not have to face the same injustices. The truth, while painful, had finally been brought into the light, and for the first time there was a real chance for reform. How does the exposure of systemic corruption in institutions like the police force affect public trust? Can it be repaired, or does it take years to rebuild? What role do individuals like Maya play in challenging the status quo, and how can one person's pursuit of justice lead to larger societal change? The reckoning highlights the essential role of accountability in addressing systemic issues within institutions of power. Maya's pursuit of justice not only holds Daniels accountable, but also exposes the depth of corruption, setting the stage for real reform. The investigation into the department's actions serves as a powerful reminder that, while one person can make a difference, the fight for change is often an ongoing struggle. The fallout from Daniels' confession was swift and far-reaching. The corruption that had festered within the department for years was finally brought to light, triggering a massive internal investigation that shook the very foundation of law enforcement in the city. No longer could the department operate as if it were invulnerable to scrutiny. especially not after the public exposure of such a deep and systemic failure. Within days, the department was in disarray. Officers who had once been untouchable now found themselves facing the harsh glare of accountability. Several high-ranking officials, implicated in the cover-up and the culture of misconduct, chose to resign, unable to withstand the pressure or the looming investigations. Others, more determined to protect their position, were placed on administrative leave while the internal inquiry continued to unearth their involvement. The most significant moment came when Daniels himself was stripped of his badge. The very symbol of his authority, once worn with arrogance, was now ripped away, leaving him exposed for all to see. His arrest followed shortly after, as the weight of his numerous offences came crashing down. Daniels was not only charged with assaulting a federal agent, but also with multiple counts of misconduct, excessive force, and racial profiling. His actions had led to a domino effect, as the department found itself forced to confront its darkest secrets. For Daniels, the fall from grace was swift. The once powerful officer who had felt invincible behind his badge was now just another criminal facing the full force of the law. The public outcry was intense, with many demanding not only his conviction, but also a broader examination of the police force's practices. Daniels' trial became a media spectacle, as the community watched in anticipation, waiting for justice to be served. But while Daniels' downfall was inevitable, it was Maya's unwavering bravery that truly changed the course of history. Her decision to stand up, to not let this injustice go unchecked, had set in motion the chain of events that dismantled a corrupt system. She had become a symbol of what it meant to confront the uncomfortable truth, no matter the personal cost. Maya's actions went beyond a single victory for herself or for Elijah. Her courage had given others the strength to speak out as well. Officers who had long been silent about the systemic abuse within the force began to come forward, blowing the whistle on their colleagues and supervisors who had been complicit in the corruption. The once solid walls of protection for those who abused their power began to crack, and a new wave of reform began to take shape. The aftermath of Daniels' exposure served as a powerful testament to the idea that justice, though delayed, can still prevail. It wasn't just the consequences Daniels faced that mattered. It was the larger impact of his downfall on the entire system. The investigation and the resignations were only the beginning. For Maya, the real victory wasn't in seeing Daniels arrested or even in the headlines. It was in knowing that her actions had catalyzed a movement for accountability within a system that had long operated with impunity. Justice, in this case, was not just the conviction of one officer, it was the unraveling of a toxic culture that had shielded itself from scrutiny. The department, now in a state of crisis, would be forced to reckon with its failures, leading to crucial reforms in training, transparency, and oversight. Maya's bravery had ignited a spark of change that would reverberate through the force and beyond, creating a path for others to follow. For Maya, it was never just about one moment of victory. It was about ensuring that future generations wouldn't have to fight the same battles. Her determination to face down injustice, to challenge the system from within, was the real legacy of her actions. She had shown that even the most entrenched systems of corruption could be dismantled piece by piece when individuals were willing to stand up and demand accountability. How can the legal system and law enforcement ensure that the truth is not buried, even when powerful institutions try to protect those who abuse their power? What do you think is the most effective way to dismantle corruption within institutions, and what role do individuals like Maya play in this process? The conclusion of this narrative is not only about Daniels facing the legal consequences of his actions, but also about the larger societal shift that Maya's bravery ignited. Justice, when pursued with unwavering determination, has the power to bring down even the most corrupt systems, and spark lasting change for the future. As the dust settled and Daniels faced his reckoning, Maya found herself standing at the crossroads of a much bigger fight. The case was far from over. While Daniels' downfall had been a significant victory, it was only a small piece of the larger puzzle that needed to be solved: the systemic racism that ran deep within law enforcement. It was an issue that extended far beyond one officer's actions, one department's corruption, or even one community's pain. It was a pervasive, entrenched problem that affected every corner of society. Maya knew that the real battle was just beginning. The department's reforms, while important, were only a start. There were still far too many officers like Daniels who operated with impunity, too many communities where law enforcement was seen as the enemy rather than a source of protection. The culture of silence, the code of protection that shielded bad officers, still existed. And it wasn't just a problem within the police force. It was a problem that echoed throughout the entire justice system. Despite the personal toll, despite the threats against her and the powerful figures who sought to silence her, Maya was resolute. She knew the risks. She had seen how quickly powerful people could turn against you when you threatened the status quo. But she also knew that she couldn't stop now. There were too many people relying on her, not just the victims of police violence, but the officers who were committed to reform, the families who needed to know that their voices could be heard, and the next generation of activists who were looking for leaders to show them the way. Maya had always believed in the power of accountability. She believed that the truth, no matter how uncomfortable or painful, had to be faced in order to make lasting change. And now, more than ever, she was committed to fighting for a future where justice was not an abstract concept, but a real, achievable goal for everyone, regardless of their race or background. As she looked back on the journey, Maya understood that her fight was part of a larger movement, a movement that couldn't be stopped by one setback or by the resistance of those in power. The road ahead would be long, but it was one she was prepared to walk. And as she did, she would continue to push for the changes that were necessary to make sure that no one would ever have to endure what she and Elijah had experienced again. The video ends with a powerful, lingering message for the audience: accountability, resilience, and the importance of standing up against injustice. It's a call to action, a reminder that the fight for justice isn't just one person's responsibility. It's a collective effort, one that requires courage, determination, and an unwavering belief in the possibility of change. As the screen fades to black, Maya's voice echoes in the background. The fight doesn't end here. We all have a role to play in making the world a better place. And it starts with us. Stand up, speak out, and demand justice, because silence is complicity. The message is clear. Change is possible, but only if we are brave enough to demand it. What do you think is the most important step in creating real change within law enforcement and other institutions that perpetuate systemic injustice? How can we as individuals support movements for justice and accountability in our communities? The aftermath of Maya's journey doesn't just close the story. It opens up a larger conversation about justice, resilience, and the collective responsibility we all share in standing against systemic racism. Maya's journey isn't just a personal one. It's a reflection of the broader struggles faced by countless individuals and communities who fight for change every day. The video serves as both a conclusion and a call to action, a challenge to the audience to carry the torch forward in the ongoing fight for justice. Racism and police brutality. At the heart of this story is the painful and pervasive reality of racism in law enforcement. The narrative highlights how black individuals like Maya and Elijah are often assumed guilty by default, simply because of their race. This unjust presumption is not just a minor inconvenience, but a dangerous, life-altering reality. Maya, an FBI agent, is forced to endure this very treatment, showing how even people in positions of authority are not immune to the prejudice that runs deep within society. The story isn't just about one instance of police brutality. It's a microcosm of a much larger issue that continues to plague our justice system. It's a stark reminder of how race can still determine how a person is treated by the very system meant to protect them. Abuse of power officer Ryan Daniels represents the kind of officer who abuses their power, seeing themselves as untouchable. His belief that his badge provides him with immunity is a dangerous, toxic mindset that perpetuates abuse within law enforcement. He is emblematic of the officers who wield their authority as a shield, using it to harass, intimidate, and even harm others, often without fear of repercussions. His aggressive actions toward Maya, a respected FBI agent, serve as a reminder that some officers feel invincible, operating outside the bounds of accountability. Daniels, in this case, embodies the systemic issue, where power is used not for protection, but for control, reinforcing the need for constant vigilance in ensuring that authority is not misused. Courage and justice, Maya represents the power of courage and resilience. In the face of injustice, she refuses to be intimidated, standing firm despite the threat of violence. Her bravery, both in confronting Daniels and in pursuing justice for Elijah, demonstrates how crucial it is to stand up against corruption, no matter the cost. Maya's unwavering belief in justice, regardless of the personal toll, is what ultimately drives change. She understands that the fight for justice is not always easy or quick, but it's necessary. Her actions show that real courage isn't about the absence of fear, but about pushing forward in spite of it. Maya reminds us that sometimes the most powerful weapon against injustice is a refusal to back down. The impact of public exposure. The video underscores the power of social media and recorded evidence in exposing wrongdoings and pushing for accountability. In the age of smartphones and social media, video footage can be the catalyst for justice. The moment Daniels assaults Maya, the crowd captures the scene, and in an instant, the truth is out for the world to see. This public exposure becomes a powerful tool, shifting the narrative and forcing authorities to respond. The viral footage puts pressure on the justice system to act, illustrating the significant role that public awareness and the ability to document injustice play in holding people accountable. Without this recorded evidence, Daniels may have continued to operate unchecked, reinforcing the idea that sometimes the truth needs to be exposed in the harshest light for real change to happen. In the face of racial profiling and police brutality, individuals play a critical role in standing up for justice. By speaking out against injustice, supporting movements for reform, and holding those in power accountable, we can collectively work towards dismantling systemic racism. Whether through advocacy, raising awareness, or engaging in meaningful conversations, each person's contribution is essential in challenging the structures that perpetuate inequality. The increasing role of social media and video evidence has drastically changed how we approach justice, especially in cases of police misconduct. These technologies have made it easier to document and expose wrongdoings, often forcing institutions to confront uncomfortable truths. The power of video evidence in particular has the ability to shift public perception and pressure authorities to take action, making it a crucial tool in the fight for accountability and reform. The themes of racism, abuse of power, courage, and the impact of public exposure are interwoven in this story, highlighting the ongoing battle for justice and equality. This narrative serves as a reminder that true justice requires not only individual courage, but collective effort. It is essential to confront difficult truths, use our voices to demand change, and hold those in power accountable. Only through such concerted action can we hope to create a more equitable society. If I were in Maya's shoes, Fighting for justice would be a daunting but necessary task. The choice to stand up against injustice, especially when the stakes are so high, requires immense courage and resilience. The question of risking everything for justice is one that many face in different ways, but it is a powerful prompt for reflection on how we, as individuals, can contribute to the broader fight for racial equality and law enforcement reform.